Hello, and welcome to the DEI Consortium Lowell's Candidate Spotlight for Monday, October 25th, 2021. My name is Sue Kim, and I'm a resident of Lowell and co-chair of the DEI Consortium's Communications Committee. The DEI Consortium is a grassroots organization of community members whose mission is to dismantle racism, amplify unheard voices, and lead impactful action for a just and equitable Lowell. The purpose of the DEI Candidate Spotlight is to provide an opportunity for you to hear from candidates for Lowell City Council and School Committee, particularly their track records and priorities around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tonight, we will be spotlighting first Jackie Doherty and Connie Martin, who are candidates for School Committee at large from 7 to 7:30. And then from 7:30 to 8, Erik Gitschier, who is running for City Council in District 8, will join us. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Jackie and Connie to first introduce themselves for a couple minutes, talk about their experiences and priorities around diversity, equity, and inclusion, any other key priorities for them. So Jackie, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Sue, and thank you to the DEI Consortium for giving me this opportunity to share some information about myself as a candidate. My name is Jackie Doherty, and my 14 years serving on your school board, the role has always been about looking at the entire district from an equity lens, making sure all schools have the resources to meet the needs of their students. My record shows that putting students and families first, along with diverse hiring and support for staff, are just a few of my priorities. I also value keeping our schools balanced and honoring our consent decree. I do my homework, ask questions, listen and respond to community concerns, and I hold the administration accountable to meet the needs of all our families. We've all been under tremendous stress during the last 18 months because of this pandemic. And while the schools have made some progress in terms of increased diversity hiring and empowering parents on our school site councils, there is still much work to be done. So I've got a couple that I just want to highlight points. It's by no means all of the priorities for me, but just as I look at the work before us in the next 2 years. So the first one is really to keep our students in school by making sure that facility upgrades and safety protocols continue throughout the district. We saw so much loss when we had to be remote, and we recognize that has been an unfair burden on some families and students more than others. So we really want to, for me, that's a priority, keeping our kids in school. 2, we need to invest the COVID relief funds wisely in ways that are really going to support student learning, health and safety, and well-being. We know there's a lot of anxiety. Our students are experiencing a lot of anxiety. We need frontline staff to provide those resources to our students. 3, improve the Family Resource Center to make sure they are responsive to all families, especially our newcomers. The last couple of years have really shined a spotlight on areas that need great improvement in how we outreach and connect and onboard our families. And again, I think that it's put in an added burden on those families with the least resources to be able to manage that. So that's very important to me. And the last one I'll mention now is to continue with the diversity hiring while also ensuring we provide a supportive, culturally sensitive environment, not only for our staff that are coming in, but for all our students and our families, making sure that our parents feel welcome and wanted as partners in our schools, and also that we look at inclusive, engaging curriculum. So I want to just highlight a couple of motions, and I know Ms. Martin will talk about, which I think was our big one that we did together. It was very disappointing to me that the City Council did not make that much majority vote, especially after we had those learning sessions a couple of years ago. I found those were so impactful to hear from our community, especially students, about we need to do a better job And it really starts with us. So the August 18th motion that Connie and I both sponsored, that racism as a national public health crisis. I've also multiple other kinds of motions that I think speak to equity. It was 3 years worth of multiple motions just on outside play space. And again, as I started, I talked about equity being what each school has for resources and to meet the needs of their students. And I'm very proud to say that just this spring, we are actually made motions, got it approved, and they are going to be new outdoor play spaces, appropriate outdoor spaces for 3 schools that did not have them before. That is huge for me. I've also had asking for reports on a more inclusive curriculum, maintenance motions around making sure that all the schools, the windows open, they have screens. This is all speaks to our ability to stay in school. Motions asking for the governor to provide urban and low income teaching staff priority for getting the vaccinations and working with the city to make sure vaccinations were easier for our staff. Again, that speaks to our ability to keep our kids in school with our staff safe. And I'll get off there and give Ms. Martin a chance. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Connie Martin.
Sure. Thank you very much. It's always difficult going second, isn't it?
We'll take turns on that.
That seems fair. So again, my name is Connie Martin. I'm a candidate for one of the 2 at-large school committee seats. I also want to thank DEI certainly for the work you've done during this election, but really for the work that you've been doing for several years now here in the city of Lowell. I think it's been an extraordinary effort, and it's been, I think, a real positive move in our city. So speaking about the school committee in terms of my role and our priorities moving forward, you know, for myself, I have served on the Lowell School Committee I'm in my 22nd year. It has been a very long, very, I would say, impactful education for me, having had the opportunity to learn a great deal about our city as a whole, in addition to kind of the school system and the intricacies of that. I think that, you know, I look at the role as, you know, a member of the school committee to really be the eyes and ears and represent the hopes and dreams for our entire community. That includes students, it includes families, but it also includes the broad definition of community members and stakeholders. I really see the role of public education as that profoundly impactful equalizer, that it does give us the opportunity for all of our students to be successful. When they're successful, their families are successful. And when their families are successful, our community is successful. I've always taken a very clear-eyed, I think, approach when we look at our budget. When I first came on to the Lowell School Committee, it was literally the last year of ed reform. And from my first budget 22 years ago, we made cuts every single year, which has been difficult and damaging. And we've lost a lot over that period of time. I think that, you know, I have always come into those budget conversations and discussions really always being very clear about making long-term investments, about being very smart about each educational dollar that we spend, because we need to get the most from every single one of those investments. We find ourselves in a kind of very different circumstance now, where with the ESSER funding, both from the federal government and additional state funding, we really have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make investments in our educational infrastructure, both in terms of buildings and facilities, but also in terms of curriculum and staff training and being able to build systems that will be equitable, that will be fair across our district, and that will allow us to raise the bar for all of our students and all of our staff. You know, Jackie obviously has mentioned some of the actions that we've already taken. I do want to talk a little bit about when we did take the vote on racism as a public health crisis, and it was specific to the systemic issues in our school system, in education in general. Certainly something that's not, you know, unique to Lowell. This is a nationwide situation. We all need to be addressing it. And I think one of the things, certainly for myself in working with Jackie and developing this motion, is that I came to the representatives of DEI to help us craft that motion. We had originally written it. we had reviewed it with the city solicitor first, and then we had reviewed it with a representative from the DEI leadership group, specifically to make sure that we were amplifying that voice, that we wanted to ensure that the language that we were using really was in line and taking into account other voices as well as our own. I found that to be very helpful. And I think in the end, we had a motion that we took all the advice that we had received from DEI. It was incorporated into that motion. And I think both the process and the motion itself really, really accomplished what we had hoped to accomplish with that. And I was very proud to make that motion. And I think we can certainly, I can look for myself at additional motions. I know when there was a period of about 5-6 years ago, when there were real concerns about ICE agents being able to come into our schools and without parental even notification being able to remove students. And that was a motion that I had made in conjunction at that time with a fellow committee member, Robert Gignac. We had made that as a joint motion to say that that was not going to be allowed in our schools, that parents' rights would never be ignored. So there've been, again, 22 years. There's a lot that's gone on. And the idea of equity and being able to show that across our district, we're giving all of our students the opportunities they need, that they'll require to be successful in life, is something that has always been the lens that I've used. And I know we've talked about it a little bit before, but for myself, that's what drove me to kind of make my run as an at-large candidate, because I've always come at this work being able to look at the full district and being able to kind of use that as to set my goalposts. And even with this new structure now in place, I still felt that that was the place where my voice could be most effective.
Great, thank you both so much. So you've both mentioned the racism is a public health crisis. And yes, I would like to note that the school committee did pass this motion, whereas the city council did not. So just to review, so in 2020, the racism is a public health crisis was a letter signed by over 1,500 individuals and organizations in Lowell, essentially calling on the city to address racism, systemic racism across the board. And what I would like to highlight is some of the steps that the letter laid out, right? In particularly, what it focused on or called on the city to do was to articulate and communicate the city's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to establish protocols for data equity and integrity, right? Just getting baseline data is surprisingly difficult. I mean, this is, the city, unfortunately, the city of Lowell is not alone in this. Many institutions have this problem. Mandating, regular anti-racism and anti-bias training, establishing an independent civilian advisory committee to work with the police, and then establishing an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And these are, again, geared more toward the city, but I was wondering if you could talk about particularly where the city and particularly the school system, what strides it has made and where you think that it needs to go next. I mean, I do think that the school system has always been one step ahead of the city in general, right, in these things. So just to reflect on what, where the city has specifically, done well, and then what are some key next steps? And so maybe this time we can start with Connie.
Super. I will say, starting with the letter, I was a signer on the letter when it was first brought forward. Proud to say that the agency I work for was also a signer on that document. So really supportive from the get. And prior to that, truth be told, I think that, looking at it from the school department perspective, I think we have seen and we have been able to kind of be a step ahead on a lot of these areas. And I think that, when you look at, kind of these priorities here, data is certainly a huge component of being able to make these decisions. I think it's something that I know for myself, I know for Ms. Doherty, we are committed to ensuring that we're getting accurate data from the school department. ensuring that the decisions we're making that are based on that data are in, have a solid foundation. So that's, I think, a key part of understanding the way any district work is understanding the data and being able to share it and communicate it clearly. I think, obviously we've had some, I think we've made some steps forward. We have a staff that is devoted to diversity and inclusion. So, I mean, that's, that's one major step forward. But I think that we also have to ensure that as we kind of take steps as a committee, that we're also following up with the real substance. And I think that's where for myself, as we move forward, I'm hoping we can see more and more substantive changes. I look at some of the things that we've certainly committed to. The idea of professional development for us as a committee is one of the things that, this committee had voted for. It unfortunately hasn't happened yet, which I think is, and it's on the list. It's on the list of things that we need to go moving forward. I'll say for myself, I took it on as a personal goal. I had the opportunity to go through professionally in my professional career, an equity training that took part with our leadership as well as our board. I'd also gone beyond that, and through the Mel King Institute, had taken the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond anti-racism training, gone through that process. And then I think even personally, my reading has changed. I really, as this has kind of become certainly not just a Lowell phenomena, but a nationwide one, I took very seriously my responsibility to find out more, to understand what role I played as a school committee member, certainly, but also as a person, as someone who's living in this world and wants to be able to be better equipped to help make things better.
Great, thank you. Jackie?
Well, it's nice to see we're both on the same page with that as well, Ms. Martin. I do think when you sit on a school board, this making education a priority and self-education a priority makes sense. I've also participated in a number of different workshops, one that LTC actually sponsored, one at the Lowell Community Health Center, and one through my place of employment. I work for a nonprofit agency where we work with, well, in my role, I work with families who have severely disabled children. I'm a family support specialist. So I think part of it for me is understanding that I've always been someone, I'm one of those people, and I think there's a lot of these well-meaning people throughout the city, which is why the city council, I think, had such a hard time, coming forward and say, it's not about we a racist, racist city. Racism is here, no more, I would hope a lot less than most other cities, but to not take that personally, but to understand, what do I have to do besides trying to not be a racist person and trying to raise my children with those values. And from my reading and my learning and what we've seen happen in the last couple of years in this country, I realized that really as a white woman, I needed to not only educate myself more about the systemic racism that's been in our institutions, whether it's education, criminal justice, housing, you name it, right? But also to step up and be a voice for movement away from those systems. So I think that that's made me more active in ways that maybe before I would just, be a more passive observer than an active participant. And I think the city, I think we've been ahead of the city because we had to be.
Mm-hmm.
We look at the demographics of the children we're educating, and we are held accountable to those demographics. And we had to say, okay, we need to get our parents involved. How do we do that if they don't feel welcome, if no one speaks their language, if no one reaches a hand out and says, we want you at the table? So we have, by sheer necessity, been forced to do the work. And I think as we have grown as a community and understanding it, I have felt our role has become even more important on the school board and being role models for the city, that this can happen. And I think the city is coming along. I mean, I don't know if they've hired a person, but they are looking to hire somebody,
Right.
and
Yes,
they're looking to make these movements. So it's, like I said, it's always been something I've valued, and it's kind of what prompted me in the beginning of even running, as a parent on the citywide parent council. I just had this epiphany that my kids were going to be fine. They had 2 English-speaking, college-educated American parents who were and assertive ones at that, but what about all those other children? And I recognize we are all in this boat together, and we will rise and fall only if we all rise. And so it's been very important work, and it's been just good to be here for this part of it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So we have one question from the audience. So, but what is one, I mean, you both served for a while, but what is one sort of fresh or new idea that you have for engaging or amplifying parents in the education and in the educational process, and or for curriculum development needs? I mean, so what are some ways, that we can engage families and parents in, more in the educational process? I mean, one is, just getting them to meet, but then also, incorporating them more into this process.
Oh, do I go first this time?
You can, either one of you can go first.
Well, I think that as much as the pandemic has put a huge burden on all of us in many different ways, the technology piece has been exciting. And this idea of being able to build on our capacity as a community to use technology. So that, we made a commitment, every student was going to have a Chromebook, and, and we tried to expand our internet access out the city, those sorts of things. I think combined with this more inclusive kind of curriculum and understanding that, to look at history or who we are as a city by just the lens of the dominant force, is really to do a disservice, not only in terms of the facts and the accuracy, but all the opportunity to engage people. So using technology and expanding on the inclusiveness of our curriculum and engagement. We know that some kids get excited about art. Some kids get excited about sports, looking at not only these different ways of engaging our students, but what is going to help our families to come on board. And if we're teaching things or have curriculum that they can connect to, that's another opportunity.
Great, thank you.
I think that we have certainly over the years tried a lot of different approaches in working to bring parents into the classroom, because honestly we all recognize that is that's a child's first teacher. That's the child's most important teacher, is their parents, their family, the adults that support them, and I think we've tried some of the some of the more traditional things that just don't quite resonate, I think. And I think part of that has to do with the population, but I think part of it also has to do with the real world. We have a lot of families where parents are working 2, sometimes 3 jobs. It's a lot to ask someone after that to come to a PTA meeting. Mm-hmm. I mean, so I think we have to recognize that we have to offer families different ways to get involved and get engaged. I think, to Jackie's point, technology is absolutely part of that. I think that we do have a great opportunity now where we've kind of laid a foundation to be able to use technology effectively. But I think ultimately it comes down to innovation and creativity and a true warmth in wanting to bring families in. You can look back when, and again, this is kind of pre-pandemic, but we used to get amazing responses to math nights. We used to get great family responses to, something as simple as a school play. I mean, I've been to them. There are some very talented kids in Lowell, and They are not necessarily all the ones who are on stage. I'm going to be honest. There could be some rough musical numbers, but they are extraordinarily engaged. And parents, teachers, the whole community can really get excited and feel a part of a school community when that type of activity is going on. So I think, like anything else, it's a matter of marrying new technologies with the existing kind of community building events we can do. And I think really ultimately it comes down to a recognition from staff at all levels that that's an important part of every job in the Lowell School Department, is engaging with families in all the different ways we can. Again, I wish I had like that one sentence answer that I could solve the problem, but I can't. And I think we really need to look to our parents and look to our school communities to find those answers for us. And we need to be responsive. We need to be open and willing to consider new ways of doing things.
Great, thank you. I think we have probably time for one, maybe two more questions, but I mean, one is, I think, because you both have done a lot, and you have a lot of experience on the school committee. And so I think this one is kind of more, it's a practical question, but also maybe more kind of a philosophical question. Because Jackie said, as you said, that we're all on this boat together, right? And I think, one of the maybe eye-opening for some over the past few years is the vehemence to which, the resistance to some things that, that don't seem like, don't seem to me like that controversial, right? But so, for example, right, like the culturally and linguistic sustaining practices, being proposed for Lowell Public Schools, being called Marxist, right? Which is, just this is kind of astonishing to me. Or also the discourse around critical race theory, around the country, which again, I'm an ethnic studies scholar, and I'm like, critical race theory is a very specific thing that's taught in law schools, right? So but I guess the question is more, given that that this is the dynamic in our community, right? And that how do we talk to? I know it's difficult, but I feel like you have insights about this, right? What is the way forward, I guess, is my question, right? Is it possible to talk to those across the aisle, or, where are the places where we can reach out to, like, either, students or families or parents or, like community members? Where are the places where we can actually have a dialogue? Where do you see, like, what is the way forward for us, collectively, when we're in this situation where it just seems like people are not listening and not talking to each other? And I know that there's really no perfect answer for this too, but this is really a genuine question about, like, how do we move forward with this?
If you don't mind, Jackie, I can jump in first. I think, and it's a dynamic I've noticed too, again, over 22 years, there has been a real change in the way political discourse happens. And I think it started at the national level. And I think, I spent many years where I could say, you could see the difference in local politics versus kind of, national politics. Because at the end of the day, if you were on the Lowell School Committee, the reality was, if you got in a fight with somebody about something, you were still going to see them at Market Basket the next weekend. And it kept everybody kind of in check, because, at the end of the day, we did kind of recognize that we are, in the same boat, on the same team, whatever metaphor you want to use. I will say, I had come at it, and I've said this many times, when you're on a school committee meeting, you need to leave it all out on the field. You need to say what you need to say. You need to cite your facts. You need to be passionate and try your best, at least, to be eloquent in the way that you're putting forth your motions and the way you're fighting for your cause. And it should all be out there in the open, shared with the community as a whole, because that's who you serve. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to walk away. And at the end of the meeting, you should all be able to have a cordial conversation and move on. I think that, it is a fine line, and I think it's finer still now because of the the enormity of misinformation that is kind of in the zeitgeist right now. And I think it's very difficult to kind of break through established ideas. I've had conversations around critical race theory, around all these different, very, divisive topics. But when you can really have a true conversation where you're going back and forth and talking about, critical race theory, it's about the truth. It's about both sides of the truth. It's about honoring both sides of the truth, and being realistic and again, looking at something clearly and based on facts and being able to see both sides of it. And I think that it has gotten wrapped up in a lot of other, kind of misinformation and misattribution. And I think the only way to combat it is with clear, concise, direct language about what things really mean, about what the facts on the ground really are, and being able to describe, certainly as a school committee person, being able to describe how I've come to my conclusions. If I'm making a vote, I want everyone to understand how I made that decision, what resources I relied on, what research I did, what understandings I bring to it. And I think that's what we all owe the public that vote for us, to help them understand how we come to our decisions.
I don't know. Do we have time for a minute? I think.
Yeah, you have
covered it very
maybe
well,
just
Ms. Martin.
1 minute if you'd like to. Oh, wait.
sorry.
I think that when people ask me, I always say, what do you mean by critical race theory? Oh, what do you think this is going to happen? Because I misunderstandings, like people read some, someone else's interpretation and think that's what's happening. But if we actually talk about what it is, I think we can come to a place that we might not completely agree, but it doesn't have to be, as you said, so hateful. That's what it feels like sometimes, like personal attack. Like you might not share my idea or think this is a good idea, but that doesn't mean you have to attack me personally. And I think our way forward is our young people. That we provide these forums in school for conversations about race, about, and we had a motion, we were going to change Columbus Day. We changed Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. And I remember Ms. Martin saying on the floor, so what else are we going to do? Because this is just like a political, banner thing. What are we going to do as a school system to really teach the children, and they will teach us how to have these conversations, that they're awkward. They're not something and there's this tendency to want to defend your position or take a stance and not really hear what the other person is saying. And we will learn that from them when we do the forums with the advisory students. They will teach us a new way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I completely agree. Young people are amazing, and they will lead the way. So thank you so much. Let's give a round of virtual applause to Jackie Doherty and Connie Martin. They're running for school committee at large. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Sue.
Thank you. Good night.
So our next guest, I'm very happy to introduce, is Erik Gitschier. Erik, are you there? Thank you for your patience.
I am here. I'm just trying to start the video, but I am here. Yep.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, thank you. We will invite you to start by introducing yourself. What seat and district that you're running in, and some of your experiences and priorities around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and any other key priorities for you.
Sure. My name is Erik Gitschier. I'm running for Lowell City Council District 8 in the Highlands section of the city. I grew up in the Highlands section of the city. I went through all Lowell public schools, Washington School, the Daly School, Greater Lowell Technical High School, and also UMass Lowell, where I received a civil environmental engineering degree. I agree with you, Sue. When we look at the city and we look at the diversity that's in the city, I think you have to look at the studies that are out there from places like UMass Lowell, and also how the city's reacted to the current events. So I think there are issues, and I think they need to be addressed. sweeping things under the rug and not confronting things as time change. You know, everything in life is a working document, and everything should be expanded upon and thought out in a kind, caring behavior way. But you need to challenge people to do better, and you also need to be an educated voice for reason across a city the size of Lowell. I grew up in the Upper Highlands. My son, we chose to raise him up here in the Highlands. Really, there was always that divide between Westford Street, whether you're in the upper or the lower Highlands, or you in the acre, where does the acre end? But truthfully, when you try to represent a city, you have to represent everybody, the diversity, everything from, you know, the infrastructure to the diversity to the community services to everything in general. And I think with my background of growing up here, going through the school system, you know, Lowell's a unique place where 50% of the people, over 50% of the people in the city were not born in this country. So, you know, when you start looking at everything in general and you look at the community itself, 23% of the community is Asian. So when you look at everything in general and you say, okay, how do we make it a better place? We have to invite everybody into the conversation. As a city councilor, that's what I'll do. I bring 32 years of municipal experience in policy making and how to get things done between not only the policy side, financial side. I was the person who actually answers the phones and actually tries to put out the fires and make sure that people are getting what they deserve for a community. So when I think about a lot of things and we look at the diversity in our city, there are challenges. I went to UMass Lowell, like I just said. UMass Lowell did a study on this, and you know, they taught me how to build bridges, and you know, the person will drive across a bridge and never ever think about the engineer who designed it. And they always respect them and believe that what they did was right for everybody. But we won't look at the same school that taught people and said, here is the study on human behavior. And they look at that and now they question that. So next time they go across a bridge, and not the Rourke Bridge, because I would question that sometimes myself, but you know, just think of what the schools are meant to do, and how, you know, education about diversity, equity, inclusion starts in the school system. If you it starts at home, and it involves, and it gets reinforced in the school system. So I think that when we look at things like that, we need to look much deeper into is our school system doing what they're set out to do. So that's really my background, and I'm really a question and answer person. So a lot of this stuff I know you're going to go forward with, but go ahead, Sue.
Sure, great. Well, I mean, we have a question from the audience, and I like to always prioritize those. So what do you see as the role of the city council in supporting the schools and students of Lowell? So, I mean, you talked about the importance of the schools, right? But specifically in relation, you know, like if you were to be elected to the city council, right? What is this? What can the city council specifically do? And, you know, what would you as a councilor do or see as the city council's role in supporting the schools and the school committee?
I truly think that a lot of people misunderstood about how government actually works. In 1993, I think that people have to understand that all of the support is the superintendent of schools. That's where it goes. The Ed Reform Act pushed politics away from, or tried to do that, and gave that fundamental responsibility to the superintendent of schools. Now, what does the city council do? They fund with the superintendent's ideas and what we think is a balance for that. All we can do is send somebody over there as a mayor to represent the city. So when we look at that 1993 Ed Reform Act, we say, okay, all powers went to the principals and to the superintendent of schools. So can we share a policy ideas? Of course, but the simple role, to break it down simply, of the city council is to properly fund the things. Give them an environment that they can actually learn within, not schools falling down and people saying how great we've done over the years. Well, we're really not giving them, you know, part of learning is the environment within you learn. And giving the teachers the resources to do that is something that the city side has to give, because I've said before, going forward is, if you want a thriving community, you must have a couple of things: public safety, schools. And if you don't have public safety in your schools and they don't coexist, You can spend all the money you want on any resources you want, but I truly do believe that if you're really looking for a thriving community, we have to get serious on those two things. And I do believe that Chief Richardson has tried to do that. When you look at his reaction to the letter that came out from DEI, and how he's giving free training and also offering the funds to take the exams. I think he stepped up big time and said, here we are, we're in this conversation and we're taking what everyone is saying seriously. So for people to say that this isn't real or that isn't real, or, they can't see something, Chief Richardson really did step up big for everybody in the city and said, yeah, we're in this conversation.
Great, thank you. So this is a kind of follow-up question to that. The city is receiving about 70 million in ARPA funds, American Rescue Protection Act funds, and the school about 30 million in ESSER monies. I forgot what the acronym stands for, but from ESSER funds. The schools have committed about half of those funds to facility improvements. Do you think the city should make an equal commitment to improving its school buildings?
I think that when you look at that, to just throw numbers across a table without having experts look at the buildings and seeing what is done is unfair for everybody. Just because you threw $15 million, it could cost you $200 million. I don't know those answers without having the proper people look at the buildings. We went out and we looked at a baseball stadium, and the first thing that came up is, let's get an OPM to look at it. When it was time for our fire stations, we said, okay, let's send our DPW commissioner and our fire chief out to look at that. So see how our priorities are so much different in the world. So I think if we truly want to put together real solutions, let's get capital planning together. Let's understand each building needs this resource to be a better place. What is the cost? So I think when you look at just saying, okay, we put 15 million and where's your 15 million, doesn't do anybody service. I don't know why they put 15 million in. I don't know where that money is going to be spent. Is it going to be spent on things that are going to, better the system, or is it just saying that we put 15 million in? I can spend $15 million in many different ways. In being in a financial position, a senior management position in government, you can misspend 15 million very quickly and say that you spent 15 million. I think that we really need to do capital planning, put long-term planning in place for each of the buildings that the city owns, and understand, okay, here is it. Is it structurally sound? Is there mold in the walls? Is there this? Is there that? Is it giving the teachers the best ventilation? So, and I do that currently. So I think just to say how much money would be spent out there is just really unfair for everybody. And if you're going to look at it, spending it in the proper ways, then let's put the proper people in place to understand where those funds are going to be spent. So the ARPA money, we can look at also our water infrastructure. If we don't put the money back into our fire hydrants and into our system that way, or separating our sewers, we're killing the environment and we're putting people at risk also. So there's a balance. And the simplest way to break it down is very simple. A $464 million budget was proposed this fiscal year. You take that $70 million or $74 million and you say that's only 15% of that budget. If we manage that money correctly, we could have that $70 million every single year as a reoccurring theme to improving our infrastructure. So we have to understand, how do we look at these dollars and make sense of them? Not just spend them to say, oh, we threw this amount of money at something, because really you're doing a disjustice to a lot of the services that are out there. And we can do better in our spending. Stevens Street is a complete mess that they just did. It looks nice. You drive by, it looks nice. But when you look at the fire hydrants were never flow tested, that means tells you how much water can come out in how many minutes. Or you look at the infrastructure that they put in, they put concrete over shutoffs and stuff like that. And we have a little Catholic right there. We didn't do the taxpayer justice. So we're just going to spend over and over again to just do those repairs. So to throw a number out there and say that would be fair, it's not really a fair question.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to turn to the HR audit of the city, right? And just, I mean, you have experience with it. So, in terms of, the HR assessment that came out from the city, had a number of recommendations, right? And, sort of high level, chief diversity officer, but also updating sort of the hiring practices, like literally some of the infrastructure and the technology and things like that. What are your thoughts on some of the ways that the city could diversify its employees to make sure that all residents of the city are represented, but also to make sure that it is as much of a meritocracy as possible?
Sure, that's a two-part question, right? So the beginning would be, obviously, when we look at it, we'd have to look at the human capital. How are we doing human capital across the board? What is our investment into our employees that are going to make them actually understand what we're doing? If we look over the last 10 years, and I think that's a simple motion to ask, can you please tell me how much training was spent on the human resource officer over the last 10 years? And say, okay, what courses have they actually taken? Where are we? I don't think it's fair to just pinpoint anything without understanding. Did we do all the diversity and equity training? I can tell you, I worked for the city for 12 years, in the first stint 10, and then 2 as an executive director in the highest position, I think, in the city, which is the most important position in the city, is in charge of your water treatment plant. But some people will think it's the city manager, but every day you drink water, understand where it comes from. But when you look at that and you're looking at the training aspect, I think we need to retrain everybody down there to understand what it actually is. And I'm not sure everybody will say what it is, for the moment, but it will be, we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and we're talking 23% of the city is Asian, and we had Stop Asian Hate over the summertime. But nobody really wants to talk about that. They pushed it off to other areas. And now we need to say, okay, so how do we do this? We have to start in our school system, and we have to bring people in there that have achieved things. When I was on Greater Lowell Tech as a school committee member, one of my pushes was to have a commencement speaker that actually graduated from Greater Lowell Tech and show them that you can achieve. Not somebody who's a state representative or someone who's that, because it's not that connection. So when you go into the schools and you start thinking about, okay, let's send a firefighter in there that can show them they came from the same neighborhood, they achieved this and that. How did you get there? What is the education I need to actually be in the consideration to be hired in the position? I think those are the things that you really need to train, because as a senior management level person in the city, I accepted all of those applications. And if the truth would be told, there wasn't much diversity, equity, or inclusion in those piles to choose from, if there were any at all. So to say that, someone's not doing something, well, you have to first understand, what was the application pool? How did that work out? And how do we get more people in that application pool who have the credentials to be interviewed? Because I can tell you right now, you don't want to put somebody in a position at the water treatment plant to use the chemicals up there just because of a background. We need experienced people, but how do we actually educate them? Can we put funding aside so we can educate our students? And again, that starts in our school systems. So we need to teach them that there are good jobs out there. And again, the city of Lowell back in the 1990s used to have jobs called laborers. You came in an entry level job. I came in as a garbage man, entry level job, no skills. Here it is. Here's the job. But they allowed me to gain skills, and it allowed me in that position to take exams to get to the next level. And then once I had those licenses, it was offered. But through the years, when people did that, when those jobs were offered, they deleted the lower level jobs and said, okay, now now you need certain credentials even to get into those positions. So I think that when you look at it, we need to create other positions that can help people get to the next level. We can't just assume that somebody's going to come in and say, we're going to hire you to drive our plow truck, but you've never driven one before, but here's the keys and go down Christian Hill. And if you stop at the bottom, you're better man than I was. Right. So those are the questions. How do we actually educate from start to end and teach people about jobs that they may love? A quick story is that I was at Greater Lowell the other day, and I said to one of the seniors, "What are you going to do?" He goes, "I don't know." I said, "You ever think about driving a truck?" And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "There's a thing called the commercial driver's license where there's a real need for truck drivers right now. Mm-hmm. You can make up to $35 an hour doing this." He said, "I can. How do I do it?" So those are simple things to give someone another avenue. And I think that we can do so much better in our educating people if everyone just puts their heads together. And that human resource office needs a complete makeover. And I was in a senior management position to tell you there's absolutely flaws in that department. And if it doesn't get changed over, we're just talking to talk.
No, I absolutely agree. In higher education, we talk about pipelines, building pipelines to like college, right? I mean, in the same way that it sounds like when we're just saying that the city used to have like pipelines and pathways, right, from entry-level positions into sort of mid-management and upper management positions, and we don't have those, or some of those have gone away. So that we have to build those, whether it's through education, whether it's through employment, that we need a variety of these kind of pathways. I think that's excellent.
Because everyone wants to come in and be the city manager,
I don't want to be the city manager.
I don't either. I don't either. But when you watch people come into these positions, sometimes we're hiring people who may be a little bit over their head and based off of an education who don't have any experience actually doing the job. So there has to be that fine balance between, just because you have an education doesn't mean you understand certain pieces. You do in theory, but when it comes down to motivating people to do certain job skills, it's not as simple, especially in a DPW environment where, when someone comes in, there's a lot of job security in that. It's not as simple as what people think, to come into. So there's a lot of job security in that, and you got to choose wisely on fit. Fit was always a big policy of mine when I did hiring. And I think if you looked at my background for hiring, you would understand what I was about.
Great. Thank you so much. So this is a question, that we've been asking all of the candidates. And it's, again, this is not something that has a simple answer, but it's about housing. It's really two distinct questions that are related, right? I like to ask multi-part questions. One is, we've had a lot of questions submitted along these lines. Essentially, what can Lowell do to address the lack of affordable housing in the city and ensure that longtime residents are not pushed out by gentrification? But also, what can the city do to address the issue of homelessness or the unhoused, right? So these are two distinct issues, right? Affordable housing and homelessness, right? But they're somewhat related because it coheres around the issue of like the lack of affordable housing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we'll tackle the homeless issue first. I think, and I've said this over and over again, that we're one of the only homeless shelters in the north. So what happens is 24 communities send their homeless to our city, and they're hands off once they're gone. So when you go to Tewksbury, you go to West Newbury, you see nice areas that don't have homeless because the only place to get help is Lowell, because we're the giving place. We have the most nonprofits, and I always say people are willing to pay more in taxes as long as they don't see the problems. And I think that's what happens. And I'm the only candidate in this that have worked in multiple communities that are wealthier. And so when I look at it, I always say that, it's easy to say I care and write a check. It's much harder to say I care and have a solution. So I think that when you're looking at solutions, we need to bring 23 other communities to the table. We got to stop with what Boston did was now you got a challenge. Where do you think those homeless people are coming? They're coming here. You just took their tents and said bye. So, where are they going to come? They're going to come here. So all they did was push their problem down. They rolled the bowling ball down the alley and sent it to our homes. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all, but that's just the facts of life. So how do we get the governor down here and have a real conversation, not clean up an area while he's here and then send the problem away? I think that we need the governor. We have state reps that are in our area that need to get serious on this issue. And we have a state senator here that needs to get serious. And we have a congresswoman. They need to get serious and not just say things to say things. We need to get the conversation home. If we don't drive it home right now, and everybody talks about election season on what they're going to do. And then once elections are gone, everyone votes their way. They understand that nobody does much of anything. It just keeps, UMass Lowell has a major problem down there. And I contacted them because my house almost got broken into a few months back. And you know, when I look at it, I said to him, you know, I don't care about my house. Some parent just dropped off an 18 to 22-year-old person down there. It's your responsibility to make them safe. And this is 2:30 in the morning where a homeless person is walking into my door where I'm only 4 houses up from the dorms. You know, people, whether they believe it or they don't, young adults do drink, they get intoxicated, and sometimes they wander. I don't know that it's safe having homeless places right next to a university on the Riverwalk over there. So I'm concerned about people's health and safety at the same time as, you know, whose life is more important. Well, you know, we need to do better with mental health. And Michael Dukakis cut all of our mental health funding in the 90s and sent people to prisons rather than deal with mental issues. And the governor, you know, really truly everybody walks around with a smile and he's done nothing. So let's pony up and come to the place that you're sending everything and give us the long dollar. We put people in management positions in the city based off of connections to the State House. Well, what are we doing? Where is that connection? Where is our money? We didn't certainly put them in there because of my, you know, municipal experience from the ground level up. Let's be serious about this stuff. People will talk around in circles because they're worried about votes. I'm not worried about votes. I'm worried about solutions. I'm worried about the next day, if I do get elected, how I can help. I'm not worried about votes. I'm worried about if I do get elected, how can I help? That's why I'm here. I am not going to get paid for this position because there's a conflict there. I will not be paid. I'm doing this out of a voluntarily position. And I'm doing it because I have a love for this city. I chose to raise my son here. My wife and I did, and we chose to sit here and try to make it a better environment for him, his friends, for our neighbors, for everybody. And that's why our name went on this ballot. It did not go on this ballot for any other reason to say, look, I've written over 140 policies for a top 90 Department of Public Works in the United States and Canada. I've done the budget stuff. I've listened to all the fluff all the way through how somebody will join somebody's camp for votes and this one will do that and that. I'm not interested. I'm interested in knocking on a door and asking you for your vote and asking you just to give me an opportunity to try to bring something different to the table and say, look, here we are. Here's the policies. Here's who we need to go get and try to get resources back to the city because we don't have the resources. When you knock on a door and you see, we're going to go to the affordable housing piece. When you knock on the door and you see somebody tell you, I can barely afford to live here anymore. Where do they go from here? This is the lowest tax rate in the state. We're one of the lower ones. Where do they go from here except down to the homeless camp? So we have to look for more funding outside of our own, and we need to get people serious about, you know, is the ARPA money okay to spend in the schools, or do we have to do other things so that we can gain revenue to feed the schools? So where does that money go right now? That's going to be a very interesting conversation.
Great. Thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but Erik, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's give Erik a round of virtual applause. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Sue, and thank you everyone for having me.
Everyone, thank you and have a good night. Early voting has started, so check the Lowell government's website, and we will see you next week for our last one. Bye. Good night. Thank you, Erik. Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you. Night.